So with that, I'd like to introduce the first speaker. So Jolanda Strubel is the data manager at the Hyve and has been involved in the verification of data sets in the IMI FAIR project, FAIRplus project. And she's going to be talking on how to measure FAIR experiences within FAIRplus. Welcome, Jolanda.
Yes, thank you. I will take over the screen. I hope you can see it.
Yes, we see your slides.
Good. So yes, hello, my name is Jolanda Strubel. I will be talking to you on how to measure FAIR, but more specifically, the experiences within FAIRplus. So I've been working at the Hyve for more than 6 years now, and I've been mainly involved in all the COMOP projects like Eden, but I've actually mapped data myself, for instance, in Big Data at Heart. And in those 6 years, I've seen a lot of these projects from the inside. And currently, I'm working as a squad member at FAIRplus. I also was a squad lead for 1 year. So what I'm going to talk about very shortly, what is FAIR, because there's been an extensive webinar by Case already. Then what is FAIRplus? Then the tools for assessing FAIR, but only the ones we used in FAIRplus, our experiences with those, and the conclusion. So FAIR, like Nicola just said, it's FAIR, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. And these are the FAIR principles that you've probably seen in previous webinars and presentations. You will see them more today, and also within the tools that I'll be discussing. So FAIRplus. It's an IMI project. So IMI stands for Innovative Medicines Initiative, and it's sponsored by the European Union and by FPA, which is a federated, how I say, it stands for Federated Pharmaceutical Companies. So, and in this project, we have 22 partners from academia, also from the pharmaceutical companies in FPA, and 3 SMEs. It started in January 2019 and it will end June next year. And the main goal of the project is to develop tools and guidelines for making life science data fair. Now that's very general, of course, and it's very broad. So what does that in practice mean? So they've split out some project aims. One of the big aims is to verify 20 IMI projects within the span of this project. And yeah, how to do that? So prioritize them. That's something that's happened because there are like 120 or even more IMI data sets or projects. So how to, if you've selected the projects, how to then verify them. We're going to develop a toolkit, and it consists of a FAIR cookbook and a FAIRplus maturity model. The cookbook will come up more, I think, but it's like that. It's a recipe. It's got recipes which you can follow to make your data more fair on several aspects of fairness. And the FAIRplus data maturity model will have FAIRplus indicators which are developed, and the maturity model itself is also in development. The FAIR cookbook is partly already published, but you'll hear more about that tomorrow. And then, yeah, we will apply this toolkit on data sets from IMI and FPA. And next to that, we also have a training fellowship scheme and a yearly FAIRplus Innovation and SME Forum. So, like I said, we want to verify 20 IMI data sets. And the way we do that at the moment is in called squads. These are teams of people who work during a certain amount of time on one IMI dataset. And this is what we do. So there's a dataset selected. First, you want to define a verification goal, because just saying, I want to be more fair is not really useful. And it will differ per project what they find important to tackle. Okay, after that, you just dive in deeper with the data owner. So what's already in place? What kind of actions would we take to reach this goal? Then you go into a cycle. So the squads work in 3-month release cycles. And these cycles just start off with an assessment. And like I said before, already just measuring FAIR is already difficult, but you want to do that because you're going to do actions on your data set and you want to prove that you've improved your fairness. So you've got to measure something. So afterwards, you also do an assessment to show I've improved. And then you can share what you've done, for instance, in a recipe. So if it's something new, there will be a recipe from that for the cookbook. So yeah, tools. So if you go and look out there, there are a lot of tools. And in FAIRplus, and the ones I'm going to be discussing today, we've used one online tool, which is the FAIR evaluation services. This is a link. I will share these slides later on the drive. And like a manual assessment, and that's just using the RDA indicators. And like I said, we're developing our own indicators within FAIRplus, and these will be based on these RDA indicators. So the FAIREvaluator services. So it's by a group of people who call themselves the Maturity Indicator Authoring Group, and it consists of some academia, but also, for instance, GoFair. It is actually possible to make your own. So to import, if you got these indicators, the source data, the code is available on GitHub. You could make your own evaluator with this, which is nice. So it's automated. It's an online tool, but 2 prerequisites that you need is it needs to be published. So the data you want to assess, you need to give an URL to this evaluator, and you need an org ID to run it, to run this evaluation. So our experiences within FAIRplus. So we took a project called Resolute. If you want to know more, this is also a link, and they have a lot of data, different types of data, but we took the transcriptomics data at that point because it was published in the SRA repository. We put it in there. You can see it here, the lower right. We had rather low scores. It only succeeded for 3 out of 22 tests. And that was mainly due to the fact that this project has a lot of metadata, but they've got it in a PDF form. In that stage, we had a PDF file with all this metadata in it. It wasn't in the SRA repository, and there was also limited room in that repository, and some of it wasn't machine readable. And this is, of course, based on machine readable tests. If you want to look in more detail in how does this work, and so the results of this actual test for Resolute is on their website, which is something also to keep in mind, because that's what happens. Your results will be on the website. So for this project, the conclusion was, this isn't the right repository for us. We want more metadata with our data set. So they went and searched and put it in a different repository. And the low score was because we have a lot of metadata, but it wasn't machine readable or even in a repository. And one of the drawbacks for FAIRplus was that we're not going to use this anymore because it's only for published data, and not all IMI projects will have public data. And the FPR partners, most of the time, really don't have publicly available data. So we decided not to continue with this for now. And we continued with the RDA indicators. So it's developed by RDA, which stands for Research Data Alliance. And they developed it to assess where and in what degree you adhere to the FAIR principles, which I showed earlier. And they already indicate that they designed it for reuse, like we're planning on in FAIRplus. If you're really interested in the background and all the details on all the history of this and how to use it, it's in this link. So it's a manual assessment. And one of the things is, it's just this document with, there's also an Excel spreadsheet with the indicators in there. But if you really want to use it for your own assessments, you need to take that and make your own template or form for documenting it and the actual assessment. And what you also need is, you don't have a URL in this case, you really need to know a lot about the data set or database that you're assessing to be able to answer all these indicators. Excuse me. So conducting this assessment. So this is something you will do actually after my presentation yourself. So in FAIRplus, we use this template, which will be available. And simply, it just gives you an indicator and the appropriate principle. And every indicator has a priority, and it's either essential, important, or useful, and you just give it a 0 or 1 score. So it's fail or succeed for these indicators. And then at the end, you will get 3 scores. You will get an overall score, the essential score, so just the essential indicators, and the non-essential indicators score. So we use this on several IMI datasets actually, for several projects. So databases, datasets, some catalogs even. And what we found was you really need to specify for which dataset or database you're assessing. So we've got a possibility in that form to say it's this dataset. So for instance, for Resolute, they have like 20+ datasets, so they will have 20+ assessments if they'd like. And what we also found was during the assessments, either on yourself, by yourself, or with the data owner, there were a lot of discussions. So just interpreting what is meant with this indicator. So if you look at the right, for instance, what is meant by metadata here? What does rich metadata mean? So that was a bit time consuming in some cases. But on the other hand, it's also kind of a gap analysis, because you already had discussions with the data owner. You've already set goals for yourself, but during the assessment, you could just stumble into things where, oh, I hadn't thought about that, or, oh, that's really good for this, this data set to do. So it's kind of a gap analysis. You can get extra goals in that way. And last but not least, the score, as I've shown you in the other one, it's like 30% for all the essential ones. And that feels low, right? And it feels bad for some data owners, but it doesn't really say anything about your data quality. It just says something about the fairness of it. So that was the RDA indicators. And like I said, we're developing our own within FAIRplus. And we've got some lessons learned from these RDA indicators. So we will keep on using them until we've got our own. But for our own, we feel that you need clear descriptions. They are very ambiguous at the moment. And part of that is also examples. And we also like examples which are relevant to life sciences. And we'd also actually would like some indicators which are generally applicable for most life sciences, which is already tricky because life sciences is very broad. But just a bit more specific indicators for that for that field. And for some indicators, it was a 0, but then it wasn't clear how would I improve this? How would I go to a 1? It would be nice if that was more clear from an indicator. Well, you're missing this, so you need to do this. And last but certainly not least, just to have it not ambiguous and clear, so you don't have all these discussions and it's objective. You would like to make it automatable. So like the first one, like the evaluator, just press a button and it will just run with clear yes, no answers to these indicators. So that brings me to the conclusion. So the FAIR evaluation services. It is nice because it's automated, but it has its limitations. Because everything's public, not all the data that you would want to assess is public. And it only can test on what's machine readable and which has a clear yes, no answer. Because otherwise you will need to make very intricate checks for an indicator to see the outcome for that. Then the RDA indicators. The assessment is not straightforward. You can have long discussions. And because of that, it's not objective. If you've got 2 people doing it separately from each other, you will have different scores. That's what we found. But it's a good starting point. If you pull that then together, have discussions, and you will have a starting point for the fairness of your data set. And like with the gap analysis kind of thing, you could have other possible improvement areas that you hadn't thought of yourself before. And last but not least, for the FAIRplus indicators. So you would like to really make something, an automation, but that's very tricky because you will need very clear descriptions. And then if you have clear descriptions, it could be that there's no clear yes, no answer to it. So just some additional readings because some things I've mentioned, and I'd also like to mention the Pistoia Alliance Fair toolkit for you to take a look at if you're interested. And actually the RDA also did an assessment of all kinds of tools. So if you want more tools to take a look at, but that's from January 2020. So that was my presentation. So I guess there's time now for some questions, right?
Yes, thank you very much for a great talk and for setting the scene in terms of the indicators and the tools. I think that's been really useful. So there was one question that came on the chat from Matthias. I don't know if it was related to the transcriptomic data you were talking about. The question is, what entity are you targeting? A catalog, record, a data set, or data files? I presume that was to you.
With the evaluator services, I guess all of those, as long as it's got a URL, you can run this and see if something useful comes up. But as it's very specific with, well, with the FAIR principles as well, with metadata and stuff like that, yeah, you could predict maybe in advance. If you've got a file without any metadata, you don't have to put it in here because you already know you will be very low in your score. But I don't know if that's answering the question.
Matthias, do you want to unmute and or just let us know if that answered your question?
Yes, in principle, we distinguish between data sets in a sense of a database or data warehouse, like a collection of data, and distributions that are more like snapshots or data files. And they can be fair on their own somehow, because we can use them, for instance, for calculating scores for a publication or so, and then they do not change anymore. But there can be other snapshots in the future, just also from this data set.
Yeah, but in principle, you could do an assessment on both of them, as long as you're clear on what you're testing. And yeah, but then, yeah.
And sometimes in that case, you know, your full raw data in the database is not necessarily what you want to be sharing. It's a data set. I mean, maybe if you think about it in terms of what might somebody else want to reuse, and maybe that data set is more useful because it's had some sort of processing associated with it, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's a question from Melik, and a similar one from Fuzir. So the question is, can all data be tested by FAIRplus? And Fuzir is then asking, I assume it means in which form can the data be tested? In which form data can be tested in FAIRplus?
Well, so FAIRplus is really focusing on IMI datasets and data that the FPA partners have in-house. But the whole FAIR cookbook and other communications that will follow, like the process I showed, that will be shared at some point. So the way of working. So what we found with Resolute, for instance, they've got 20 other data sets. We just gave them the starting point, told them, here's the recipe, here are templates, and you go off and do it yourself. Because it would take a lot of, how do I say, working hours within FAIRplus to, even for these 20 to do it, everything ourselves. So there's also you need the input and action from data owners and people involved in the projects to take our recipes, take the process, and now do it yourself. So within FAIRplus, yeah, it's limited to IMI and FPA. I'm sorry to say for you.
I mean, that's the aim of this hackathon, is for that, you know, people to take their own things, because we recognize that you actually need that personal input to know.
Yeah,
to know that data or that resource. So Lyndon Zass has asked, how well do these online and manual methods that you've described work for verifying software and training materials, or have you not really tested that?
No, we haven't. No, we haven't yet, indeed. And so we're working still on our own training materials, the fellowship scheme that I mentioned. But that would be a good idea to just, you know, we're ourselves also creating these. We're also creating tools, for instance, and try that out. That's yeah, but we haven't so far, but that's a good idea indeed. Yeah.
Yeah, I suspect in our experience, some of the questions are slightly different, you know, the indicators and things.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I guess we'll see. You know, the software and tools groups can try them out during the hackathon if they have time.
Yeah.
So there's a question from Catherine on, she said, you indicated that RDA indicators didn't say anything about data quality, but are the core FAIR principles intended to provide an evaluation of data quality?
No, not really. So,
okay.
But, you know, that's FAIR also has this other connotation, and yeah, if you're an outsider and you would assume that as soon as your data are fair, your data quality is fair, but it's really not a level higher, right? It's more on metadata and not actual
not the
data quality. No,
yeah. And I think it's hard to assess quality because the quality depends on what the kind of data is. But Keir says that he's written a blog about that. And so maybe, Keir, if you put a link to that, people can go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
So you can have a look at that article. Great. So thanks again for your